Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's third annual CX Connect event. I'm Bob Fernikes, publisher of CRM Media, and I'll be your host this week. Thanks for joining us on this session, Harnessing Generative AI for CX and EX, a practical approach, sponsored by eGain. But before we jump in, I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. We will have a question and answer segment at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into the Q&A tab as opposed to the chat tab on the bottom of your screen while they're still fresh in your mind. The chat tab is open also. You can speak with us, you can speak with each other, but please put your questions in the Q&A tab so we don't lose them. So now to introduce our speakers for today, we have Ian Jones, Head of Strategic Solutions, eGain, and Eric Anderson, Senior Principal Product Manager at eGain, will be joining us for the question and answer session. So make sure you give them some good questions. So now I'm going to turn the broadcast over to Ian. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks very much. I hope you can all see the slides now. Yeah, thanks everyone as the numbers come in. So as Bob said, this is about harnessing generative AI for customer experience and employee experience. So eGain's been in the business of customer experience principally for a good number of years, and we've used a number of AI tools in that period, but such a big interest in the generative stuff, the ChatGPT and its spin-offs, that there's a lot of interest to know how you can make that work and how you can fit it in with whatever else is going on. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I must say that we haven't used any generative tools to produce the presentation, although this slide might have been a good one to try it out. That's me at the top, Ian Jones, and I'll be helped on this by Eric Anderson. So Eric is the product manager for the generative AI extensions to our product set. He's the guy who's worked with the early adopters and building the early prototypes. So Eric's going to be around for the questions, and Eric's been the provider of much of the technical content of what's in this presentation. So just a few points to sort of set the scene about where we are in customer experiences. We were discussing earlier that although there's been a huge change in technology, customer experience hasn't changed very much for 20 plus years. It's all about providing convenient access to accurate and consumable information. However, the challenge is that there's often quite a big mismatch between the content that is available within the organization and the questions that are being asked by consumers and customers of the organization. So typically the challenge in building good customer experience is in the formatting and changing of that kind of information. Now, typically in the past, that's required either just reauthoring large, heavy process-heavy documents into consumable bite-sized chunks, or in some cases in diagnostic domains, it's actually what we call knowledge elicitation. You have to sit down with the expert and just trying to map out how they solve the problems that nobody else understands how to do. So it's a very intensive and manpower intensive and skills heavy stage to get what's available and to turn it into something you can really use. That needs specialist skills of knowledge elicitation and authoring, but it also needs lots of involvement from subject matter experts, because typically before anything goes out in front of a customer, then a number of stakeholders have had to sign that off. And typically the challenges are that content is generally accurate, but it's often not consumable. It might be 20, 30 page document on a process or a product, and it's not often that easy for an agent or an author to find the relevant bits, make sure they haven't got any. But more commonly, it's an issue of the subject matter experts. So clients I've worked with say, well, if we're lucky, we can get to sit down with the SMEs once a month, but sometimes it's only once every 2 months. And at that session, they go through and sign off all the new content they want to add into the customer system, and then they can launch it. So while that's happening, significant content isn't available because you've got to get the right people to sign it off. when you think about employee experiences, I would say at the moment that's pretty much the poor relation of this. All the challenges are as big to create the content that'll make our internal help desks and agent advisor-facing systems to be useful, but they require as much effort, and because of it, that they often the time and effort goes to the customer-facing stuff. And on the subject of customer experience, I think the last presentations I heard from the likes of the analysts, Forrester and Gartner and so on, I think the view was that we're not getting universally great customer service anywhere. As customers are generally not ecstatic about the customer service experience or the customer experience, but organizations are trying to level out so that they're not giving a great customer experience, but they are giving the same level as everybody else. So it seems like organizations have decided, I may not be what my customers want, but provided I'm no worse than the rest of the people out there, I'm doing fine. So possibly generative AI can change that balance a bit, because what we're going to go through is showing how generative AI can break down some of the bottlenecks in content creation and approval, and also improve the quality of the content. So it may be that some organizations take this opportunity to leapfrog others and to come out there into the market to try to raise the bar on the customer experience. So let's see, now this is the essentially the landscape for customer service, customer-facing systems. So you've got the customer on the left, you may have web self-service, you may have a chatbot, you may have agent-facing solutions. And I think the first thing to say is, if you've got those systems now and they're working, then I don't think generative AI is going to get you to throw those things away and start again. If you've got a chatbot that's been tuned for all the intents you're facing, and if it's supported by accurate consumable information, then it's doing a good job. You may be able to extend it, but you won't necessarily need to throw it away. Likewise for self-service and agent stuff. So where there may be a change is in around the kind of content that's available to you for responses. So just looking at the landscape there, I'm going to use these three terms as a distinction now. Curated content is often what's in your customer-facing knowledge base or your web self-service knowledge base. What that means, it's absolutely correct, it's consistent, it's accurate, it's up to date, it's explainable, it's compliant, it's brand aligned. It has all the attributes of something that the business is happy to base its reputation on and put out there. So it's both accurate and usually pretty consumable. People spend a lot of time trying to make sure that people can understand that, because if they don't understand that, you're not getting the benefit. So that is your curated content. That's what often takes the most time and effort to produce, and that's where you get the highest degree of value. Now, sitting alongside that is what I'm calling documented content. A lot of our clients have a large and well-managed customer-facing knowledge base, but they've also got a corporate website, which is under other people's control, and that contains lots of other content, all of it probably relevant to what's going on, but some of it may be not as consumable as the curated content. And there's also the risk that documented content on a website may contain some stuff that's out of date or hard to find. So you've got documented content. And the third area is this place of generated content. Now, there's always been a place for generated content in customer service. It's typically agent-generated content. It's the part of the conversation where the agent uses what they know from the web and from other calls and so on, and tries to build a better, more personal experience by using their own inputs to the other sources. And that's often very consumable. Sometimes it's not 100% correct, but sometimes it's the bit that makes the experience really valuable. So the thing that we're seeing now is that there's a new type of generated content coming on board. Instead of having agents troll the web and find something useful, you've got generative AI tools which can do that much faster and arguably much better. So that's the outline of the various systems. So here I'm going to look at the process of content getting into your curated, principally your curated knowledge base, how it gets there. So you start off with typically a discovery phase, which is really what I mean is, so what am I like? What is this system? What is it, this experience got to support? What questions am I going to be asked? What type of answers and to what type of people am I going to need to provide? So there's a discovery bit. Then that leads into content creation, where you take the available bits of content and you turn them into well-read, well-written, well-formatted, correct customer-facing content. And what you find there is there is a loop that goes around there. You create the content, you have to find the SME, get him or her to sign it off, you change it, and that you have a cycle where every bit of the content has possibly multiple times before it's finally approved. So that's the intensive step, whereby the creation and getting approval. Then also part of the creation is what I'm calling different channel versions. So in one of the cases, you will write a piece of content which is for your possibly your call center advisor to refer to when taking a call. You'll need a slightly different version that the customer can refer to themselves for self-service. You might also need a slightly different version for email responses if you still do them. You'll certainly need a shorter version for chat responses, maybe different versions again for a VA. So the point is you have a core piece of content which you may have to repurpose in multiple ways to get different versions of the same content. You've got to keep all those subversions in step if any changes happen to the main one. Anyway, once you've got all your different versions, you start using them, and that's where you there is an augment phase there, so that as well as just using the content you've got, there's sometimes a need to take that core content and add to it for the specific situation or the specific customer. So that's where either the advisor or the VA will have to go beyond the standard answer, find some personalized content, maybe look at the customer details and so on, add them into there. So augmenting or personalizing the content is one aspect of the use phase. Then after that is a really key phase. It's the analysis phase, where you use your analytics to work out, okay, so what's going on with the questions I'm being asked? What are the trends? What does this tell me about the customer reaction to products and services? And particularly it tells me how well is the content I've got performing. So typically you'll find two areas you need to work on. One is missing content. You're getting asked questions that you don't seem to have a reliable answer for. So for that, you've got to go through the same creation loop to fill that gap, sometimes very quickly. So if you're in the mobile phone world, when a new version of the iPhone comes out, you may be trying to find 100, 200 new bits of information within the first 24, 48 hours. You've got to get it approved and into the system. Otherwise, you'll just be building a huge backlog of people you haven't been able to give an answer for. So you have that creation loop there. But often you've got failing content where either people use it in web services but don't like it, or they use it, but then they call back for clarification, or they escalate. So something wrong with the content, it needs to be improved. And so you need to go through that refine loop. So that's the kind of main area. And here's the next part of the practical steps. So these are where I'm going to be showing you the kind of steps that we're thinking of using across that board there. So you'll see I'm going to go through these 10 different steps and put them across that kind of landscape. And I've kind of color-coded them there because some of them in yellow are low effort. In other words, you can pretty start using those without much effort at all straight away and get quite a bit of value from it. Some you need more effort. That effort might be integration, or it might be customization. And then there are some areas where you're actually going to need quite a high degree of effort to get a full response. So I'll explain why that is as we go further on. So I'm going to start off now by looking at the different ones. And the first one is basically looking at prompts. So prompts are the thing you use to query the generative AI. So generating effective prompts is absolutely critical, because the better the prompt, the better the answer. So if you look here, this is a straightforward prompt. What do I need to do before applying for a first-time mortgage in the US? And this is what the generative AI. This is Bing, I think, came back with, which is great. It's a really nice summary and so on. But it's pretty bland. It's not. I think one of the first things people have learned is let's work on improving our prompts. So I'll work through this slightly better example here. So, because one of the things you do when you're building a customer experience solution is you often gather some really important information, and that information is really useful for while you're designing and building the customer CX solution. But it comes back into focus right now when you start to use for generative AI. So a lot of the time when we're starting to build a solution, we say, okay, so what is your vision for this? What is it going to do, and what is it going to do in a few years' time? And what are your brand values? What is it about you and your brand that makes you different? I remember we've done a number of projects with the Virgin brand, and they're very clear about this. They say, our brand is fun, fair, and informal. So every interaction you have by whatever channel, we expect there to be a bit of fun. We expect to be very fair and totally informal. So that makes it very easy to design the content and the structures for that. Then you've got the whole area of experience design. What do you want the customer to feel like when they go through the process? What do you want them to be thinking at the end of it? What do you want them to be feeling? How should that experience be put together? In a lot of cases, people will go down into working who are the different persona. So the persona are different customer segments, and a persona is a sort of exemplar of that. So you create a character of someone who typifies one of your segments. And the purpose of doing that is by really understanding that person, their life situation and so on. You can really make the solution really helpful and make it very valuable. So the point is that when you're now building prompts, you can use this stuff to be much more effective. So here we look at the prompt below. It's the top line of a session. So you are an expert in mortgage applications and an expert in customer service. That setting, that's being drawn from the vision and the brand values. Make your answers as friendly, helpful, and simple as you can, explaining your jargon. That's a little bit about the experience. Direct your answers to a 20 to 30-year-old person with little or no financial experience. Again, that's the persona. And then using just the information below, produce a friendly, helpful guide to help them understand how to start the process and what are the key factors towards applying first-time mortgage. So that gives me a much better, much more well-defined prompt. And what's below this one is, rather than just ask the generative AI to answer this question, I'm saying base all your answers on the content I'm attaching below this prompt, so that I don't want anything creeping in from elsewhere. I want you to purely base your answers on what is true for this particular organization. Okay. So the second thing is that when you're designing from scratch a customer service solution, one of your challenges is typically knowing what questions to ask. It's really quite difficult to work out in advance what you like to be asked. I've seen a number of cases, typically when we go through an upgrade for a client and take their web self-service into a different platform, one of the first things we do is check, okay, so you've got a lot of content there, how much is that being used? I remember one particular client in the utilities business had 500 bits of information on their web self-service site. And when we looked at the analytics, really only 2 had ever been used. Literally 2, which was basically, I can't pay my bill. All the stuff about the environment, about the company, about the places and so on, had just never been asked in a 5-year period. So that represents a significant chunk of work that people had done really without needing to, because that wasn't going to be the questions. So with a suitable prompt here, we can say, we can use a persona, right? You're a young person with a college degree, going to work for 5 years, steady relationship. You're looking to get a mortgage to buy your first home. Come up with the top 5 questions they would ask, explain in your own words. So, in a few seconds, you've got a really good list of questions. You can play around with it, but that saves you a lot of time. You can do the first 50 or the first, 25, whatever you want. But this really helps you get started. And then, particularly with self-service or a VA, you don't have to start off with 500 intents or answers. If you get these top 5 in there, you'll be meeting a lot of the goals of that. So that's one of the key areas. And again, these are one of the ones that's fairly simple to use. So the next area is actually creating, consumable content from the document stuff you've got available. So that's really hard. It's a really difficult skill to take a 20, 30 page document that's been written by somebody who designed a system or built a system and turn it into something which is understandable by somebody who knows nothing at all about it. So organizations spend money on this when it's on their website, when it's for marketing. They will spend money on collateral, but they often, when it comes to the contact center or the customer experience, they often try to get customer service agents to create the content, particularly the agent-facing content, and that's really tough. It's not something that they've always got great skills in depth for. So here's one way of doing it to create that. So what I've got here is, I've highlighted the important part of the prompt here, using just the information below. Go and work out, answer the question. So I put in the prompt there, the fact that you've just got to use the article below, which is about the rest of that stuff. And that means that I know that the content that I'm getting in the results here will only contain stuff that I passed into it. And I guess that's the real difference between how generative AI can be used by consumers versus how it needs to be used by businesses. If I want to use it myself and just ask a question about something, I'm happy to take the risk that not everything may be 100% correct. It'll be my job to check out whether it isn't. If I'm a business, then I can't often take that risk of saying, generative AI thinks this is the answer to your question, because there's more at stake for there's more compliance and issues around that for the business. Anyway, this one is a particularly useful one that I think will save an awful lot of time, particularly when starting new areas. So one of the challenges with for authors is to deal with the fact that customers ask questions and that not always an exact match between the content. So not every question maps directly onto an article you've written or a quick link you can supply by chat. So what you can do with this is you can constrain the response you get, but then pass the client's question, in this case typed through chat, into the generative AI. So if you look at the prompt that's underlined, use the following information to create an accurate short response to the question. And then the question there is, what are your debt consolidations, or what would I pay on $5,000 debt at the lowest rate? And then the stuff that follows that is stuff I've extracted from the knowledge base, which deals with the various rates. And the stuff you get at the bottom is a very neat response that comes out of the generative AI. First of all, it pulls out the key bit, which firstly answers the question, but then it's able to go on and answer the second question by actually calculating the rate. This is an area that it's sometimes questionable, but in this case, it's done a great job. So this deals with the point that a lot of people don't get a full value out of their chat solutions because customers come up with questions that actually don't quite fit the answers they've got, so they're trying to merge answers. So generative AI can be really good at augmenting those results, either through a VA or through web self-service to give it a bit more detail. So another challenge of organizations is that area of those different versions. So one of the things we come across quite a bit with our clients is they'll say, right, I've got a really good customer-facing knowledge base. It tends to be that they tend to have invested initially in their advisor knowledge base, but they say the challenge is it's all written with ask the customer to do this. There are bits in there that the customer shouldn't see. Now, I really want to increase the amount of contact deflection or web self-service. So is there a way that I can take this content that's agent facing and convert it into something which is customer facing? And with a suitable prompt and some suitable workflow and so on, then you can do that. So I think one of the areas of repurposing content for different styles is another big area where we see people starting to work. The example I'm showing here is taking the last prompt, I've said, can you create a shorter version of this for a chat? So on the left is the initial response, and over here on the right is the much shorter one, which you could cut and paste directly into a chat window. But the point there is that the challenge of repurposing content into different styles is, again, one that agents find a little bit difficult, and you would like to automate it if you can. So although there's a lot of time and effort spent in finding the answers to questions that come in, it's often, in some cases, more important to know how well those answers are performing. So you want to know, typically a business will want to know, so what aspects of a product am I being asked about? Which aspects of that am I performing well? Which bits are performing badly? And if it's performing badly, is it due to something the agent's saying, or is it the underlying process and so on? So this is where your knowledge management content, knowledge management tools fit in. So typically you need your analytics tool to say, right, these are the areas where I'm getting asked questions more than once, where I'm unable to give a response. So the content at the minute doesn't seem to have an answer to that. So a content gap, where you've got no results from your search. So that's always a poor experience. But then you've got lots of different ways of identifying whether, either on self-service or for the agents, if the content is not doing very well. If people on self-service don't rate it badly, although in a lot of cases, people tend not to rate things typically unless they're not great. But there are other ways as well. For example, if you can measure the amount of dwell time on the article page, and if you see an article which would obviously take about 20-30 seconds to skim, and people are closing it in under 5 seconds, that probably indicates there was something about that a significant number of people think, well, that is not the answer I'm looking for. So other things you can do is you can see if someone has searched, retrieved stuff, but then repeats that search, then you often need to look at the answers to the original search and see what's the problem with those. So this is part of the process of surfacing where the problems are. And then you can use the generative AI to help with that process. So you can obviously create draft content in the same way we're doing before to complete those gaps. But sometimes as an organization, you may have several hundred bits of customer feedback all about the same article. And it's a really unpopular job in the contact center amongst the authors to go through all those items of feedback and work out what they collectively all mean. So passing those in with a suitable prompt to say, take all these individuals and summarize it into the most important things, and then possibly using that prompt with a bit further work to say, right, using these actionable changes, give me a version of this content which is less susceptible to those faults. So supporting your KM tools to improve the stuff is another area. Now, for many organizations, the kind of ultimate goal, and often why they're looking at generative AI, is they're looking for something that will automatically give a full response and that's accurate and well understood. So what you're trying to do is create an automatic response either from chat or the VA, but you need it to, the trick here is you need to know it's absolutely correct. It's not difficult to provide an answer, but as a customer service organization, you've got to provide one, as I said, that's in line with the brand values, is completely accurate, up to date, and so on. So this is what we've got here in the blue pane there. That content has been generated from, we've got from our chat solution. We've taken the customer query and we've generated, using a generative AI, an ideally suitable question, in this case about loan disbursement. But in order to get there, we've had to do quite a few more steps. So at a high level, what we've done, I'll give a bit more detail on the next slide. We've done a semantic search, which is we've searched through the knowledge base for content that has the same meaning or is highly strongly related to the meaning of the question. And then we've passed those bits of information, which we know are relevant or highly relevant to the answer. We've passed those into the generative AI and said, generate me a nice answer based on these parameters and only using this content. And then what we've got to do is check that the answer we get is both has the right style and tone, but then we've got to check through that it's absolutely accurate before we let it go out. So a little bit more detail on that process here. So this is what we're doing here for that. So first of all, we've got on the left-hand side, and I'll walk you through it. There is a question. This is interesting because a lot of our clients are saying, well, hang on a minute, I don't always want to give an automated response. If I identify that this is a very high value customer or a very high value situation, I may say, no, this isn't one for the VA or web self-service. This is one to go to my specialist agent. So I may want to jump that away and provide either a guided help solution or something different. So, but if it's not high value content, then I need to put it in. And then this is, the first one is this class of that retriever step, where I need to retrieve all the content related to the answer from the knowledge base. Everything in the knowledge base I know will be accurate and up to date. Then I pass that into the kind of reader. So I say, generate an answer to this question using just this text that I've retrieved. And that's where we've been using different versions of GPT. And once we've got that, we then need to go through this. If the content is something we don't want to deal with, then we might jump out at that point. That's that branch there. But if it's something we're happy to deal with, then we go through. The next step is checking the tone and anything that may have crept in. Shouldn't really have done so, but it's still valid to test it. So there's nothing in there that would offend anybody. So I go through the tone is acceptable. And then I've got to go through the process of checking if that generated content is accurate, which is a tough ask. So the way that we did it in our early stages, about a year ago, is you take every sentence of the answer and do a semantic check to say, is that strongly similar to something in the knowledge base? And if there's a good match between something in the knowledge base and every sentence of the answer, then we can say, yeah, there's a high degree of confidence that everything is correct. So based on the degree of confidence, we can deliver that generative results. And then the clients we're working with now, I was also saying, well, there's a couple of things that's quite interesting. They say, well, what do we do in the case where we're not happy with the generative answer? Something about it is insufficiently accurate that we don't want it. The confidence level isn't high enough. So we don't want to, we don't want to lose the automated steps. So one thing we can do is use a different mechanism, and that's what we would call extracted knowledge. That's where you would find the best match to the answer and highlight it in a particular article. You return an article and say, this paragraph here seems to be the best thing we've got that answers your question. If there isn't a suitable answer to that, you can go yet further still, and you can maybe go down the intent route, identify what the intent is, then go down a guided process route to try and refine that till you get to the answer. So you've still got options to come up with a fully automated response, even if the generative AI doesn't do so well. And interesting, at least interesting from my point of view, is that we're already getting clients saying, look, this is great, but there are certain words, phrases, and paragraphs which I don't want generative AI to change at all. This is legally correct. This is absolutely essential that we say exactly this form of words. So we're using our as part of our personalization mechanism, so to say, right, this has to be, we have to extract that and say you cannot rephrase that in any way. It's typically among financial services companies, but it may be elsewhere. So there's certain places where they say this has got to be exactly the same. So there's quite a bit of complexity around this, but nevertheless, we have a number of live customers going down this route, and we're typically as an extension to our VA solutions. So there are a few situations where generated content purely on its own is just great. So one of our one of our applications is we provide together with a credit finance organization, we provide a virtual assistant that helps people sort out their credit problems. The way the VA works is that once they sign up for it, we go and query their credit records. We bring back their credit score, bring back various attributes that tell you why your credit score is what it is. In a lot of cases, people want to increase their credit score. And so the VA does really well, but there are lots of areas where we can tell you exactly what to do. But in some cases, it's a little bit harder. So one of the common things is that, okay, you're just not paying down your debt as much as you want each month. Okay, your credit card debt is the same at the start of the end of the month. It seems like you're spending everything you're getting. So you need to then, the VA goes through a dialogue and works out, well, where could you possibly save money? And one of the most common ways appears to be, right, eat out less, use less takeaway, less delivered food and so on. Nothing wrong with it, but it is more expensive. And it's fine to say, don't eat out so much, or don't do takeaway pizza quite so often. But that's not really a very good answer. It doesn't really help the person to avoid doing that. If they knew exactly what to do, then they'd be doing it. So what you can do is you can augment the simple answer of saying, okay, eat out less, with stuff like saying, okay, so here's the prompt, give me an evening meal suggestions for a week for someone on a low budget who only has a microwave oven, set them out as meal plans for a week. So, within a second, you get back a list of things which you can cook in your microwave, and you can work out how much that would save you each week. And if you do that, how much it would pay down your debt, and at what time your credit score would start to go up. So really helpful. It's a low risk thing. We're just taking stuff that we can get from a generative AI, and the intention is to put that straight out so as to give a much better experience to the end customer. So a couple more things to kind of round out the sort of 10 steps. After call work is in some contact centers, it's a big deal. If there are complex queries that involve multiple people, then you often find that advisors are having to spend 5 or 10 minutes on every call summarizing what the call was about, what they did, what they've said, and so on. And that's the same whether it's a call or a chat. And that's fine, but the trouble is it takes a lot of agent time. They're off the call for that. But also it means that there often isn't a standard way of doing it. So if you're the next agent to take the call, you're really dependent on how the other person phrased it. Or if it's an escalation, then you're kind of hoping that everything important is there. So to save work downstream, we think we can use, together with suitable workflow, generative AI to take maybe the chat transcript, maybe some details from the customer record or the case record, get those summarized into a particular standard format, put those into the call record, and then save time for the agent, save time for the next person on the call. And then the last one, number 10, obviously a fairly easy one here, how to use generative AI if you need to send an email with a specific tone or write a letter or stuff like that. So, a fairly easy match with that. So here to summarize those, what I've done is I put all those 10 prompts there on this kind of 2x2 with high value up the left and effort across the left there. So what you can see, the yellow ones on the top left, you can get a lot of value from those things, which really you don't need very much effort at all. You can just use standard products you can sign up for and use. But as you move across, you get to the top right, things like auto response to your chat or VAs. That's where you need to be working with a vendor because there is some degree of integration needed and customization. Now, the good news is that week by week, the effort is much less. On the previous side, where I showed you the way we've done it on our instant answers product, we would now be able to do that. We are now able to build that in different technologies in dramatically less effort because the supporting technologies are coming along. So then just looking back out to taking a few steps back and looking at the big picture for your customer experience flow, where does everything fit in? So, this big picture is what most enterprise organizations will have in some form. The customer will be able to come through in multiple channels, social, chat, BA, whatever. Then it'll get into a decision point of, right, is this self-service or is this agent contact? In which case we work out how we're going to deal with that. And then depending on which route in and what channel it is, what are the right answer finding capabilities to use, and what are the right controls to ensure that it works. Sitting behind that, you've got things you can use like browse, search, case-based reasoning for guidance, use a virtual assistant, or you can use the generative AI in that case there. Sitting behind that, you've got your different layers of content, curated, documented, and so on. So this is where you're finding that the generative AI is going to slot into those areas, either working with the author directly for generating the content, or as another source of content or access for the consumer as they come through. So I think moving towards the kind of concluding slides here now, I think what we're learning here is that there's a strong relationship between generative AI and knowledge management tools. So knowledge management is all about curated content, analytics, designing your content style, and then more importantly, having content workflows so that you know for every type of content, who in the organization needs to touch it, sign it off, and read it, and so on. And that's all vital stuff. So what we're finding is that generative AI really can enhance the knowledge management process in the ways I've suggested and others. But more critically, knowledge management can really enhance generative AI, because you can feed into the generative AI curated content which is absolutely accurate and up to date, which gives you more leverage than if you were just using the content that the tool's been trained on, which is typically not always brand new and up to date. So a couple of lessons learned, or a few lessons learned. I think we're saying that, obviously I think everybody's learned that prompts are pretty important, but the key thing about them is, from our standpoint, is that prompts are able to do with generative AI what previously it took people with specialist skills of knowledge elicitation and authoring and so on. So suddenly one of the big bottlenecks is removed to be able to get content in, to be able to manipulate and get content. Analytics is critically important. It's, particularly around generative AI, where you won't get exactly the same answer every time you ask the same prompt. So it's nevertheless important to know you need your analytics to tell you where to use the generative AI and where it needs to be deployed. So I said the key thing that we're learning is that you need, in order to get the real high value of automation, you need to have a bomb-proof way of knowing that the answer has been validated. So you need to have various forms of comparison to be able to say, everything in this answer I know to be true based on content that I have approved. And then finally, integration. You need a framework that allows you to integrate with all the other tools and so on you've got. And then I think coming up, a couple of things to bear in mind. I think, as I said, it's the generative AI is likely to rejuvenate and inject a bit more importance into your knowledge management. But you've got to introduce the controls right from the beginning. I mean, one of my colleagues is saying, well, treat generative AI as if it was a new employee. Somebody who's very bright, very well informed, but they don't really know the business terribly well. So the idea is, don't just put them directly in front of the customer because you're not entirely sure what they're going to say. But same with generative AI, put the controls in place so that you can operationalize these new capabilities. And the final thing that's pretty obvious, that the landscape's changing very quickly. So whatever it is you're using now, you've got to make sure you'll be able to slot in and out of different technology as newer and different ones come together. So before we just take on the questions there, we say, well, this is an offer we have at the moment. If you're interested to try something out, we have something we call Innovation in 30 Days. It's designed to allow people to 30-day free, no commitment for a 4-week pilot. Try out the use of some of this technology, perhaps alongside a VA or chat solution. And that's open, and we'll leave that up. Just go to the website and see if you're interested in that. And then I think we are ready, Bob, to take on with the questions. So
Hey, great.
stop the share.
Wonderful presentation, Ian. Got a lot of, I saw a lot of great comments in the chat. We also have probably twice our normal audience on live today. And what I'm thinking is the tagline to this session is a practical approach. And I think that's really what really interested a lot of people. So I'm going to jump right into the chat. We've got some great questions here, and Eric's going to be joining on this and answering these. So I'm going to start off with one from Victor. He's been waiting a long time, and basically his question is, based on your experience, how long does the knowledge management process take? I understand it's an ongoing process, yet on average, how long does it take, approximately?
Right, it's a really interesting one, because you could actually, it could be very small. For example, you could start with a VA with only a handful of bits of information behind it. So long as you know that every one of those answers is really accurate. So you really could start very small. So you don't have to wait until you've answered every one of the customer's questions. So the knowledge management process, as I said, there are a couple of bottlenecks. How skilled are your authors? If you've got people who are used to writing new content, it's pretty quick. How accessible are the people you need to sign it off? And how bought in is the organization? So really good ones, we could see something launch in 2 to 3 months. I think that number will go down, because a big chunk of that is the writing of draft content, which has historically been a manual stage. If we start off really just at the approval stage, which could go down to, I guess, a couple of weeks, a month. So that's really interesting. Yeah. I think that's where it's for the first build. It really depends. Yeah, that's an issue. So, okay.
Great. So here's another question. Have you, and I know you touched on this many times, but if you could just kind of encapsulate it, have you integrated generative AI features into your product?
I'm going to take that, or?
You are? Yes, you are.
So the initial set of use cases are focused, or we're focused on information retrieval. So how can we get information to the end user much faster leveraging AI? So we're using, both traditional artificial intelligence, machine learning as part of that information retrieval pipeline, as well as generative large language models to actually take that content and personalize it and make it more appropriate for the channel, for the actual, the use case for the user who's trying to consume that data. And then, of course, there's also the kind of the basic use cases around content generation, where an author would be trying to get past that initial writer's block. So I just want to get some ideas going to write some content. And then definitely the generative AI is very helpful in that regard. So there's some use cases there as well that we're using.
Yeah, I'd add to that, if I may, that that's one of the key things I think you got to recognize about that. When you listen to what the people who are building these products say, is they say we're not focused on attribute recovery. We're not focused on finding something on the internet. We're focused on generating something new from that stuff. So you need to bear that in mind as you're looking at this. So the use cases are, where do I need to generate something new rather than retrieve something that I've already written?
Okay. Actually, if we could just stay on that theme for a second, what's your roadmap for incorporating generative AI into your products, moving out?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to expand past more information retrieval use cases and we've already started to apply to our virtual assistant generative AI more as a fallback. So if you've gone ahead and you've trained your traditional classifier with handling for your virtual assistant, if it can't find that information, it can fall back to generative AI to try to retrieve and write an answer that's appropriate for the query. But we're looking to do more with trying to suggest the best next response to an agent, and then to take that further to really automate and include generative AI and the conversational chatbots that we deploy.
Great. We were talking before the session started, and last November, ChatGPT kind of entered the consumer world. So we're definitely getting a lot of questions on that. Actually, how can you improve the accuracy of GPT output and validate it? I know Ian just covered this pretty thoroughly, but it also seems like the big problem.
Yeah, probably the most important step. We're not trying to train large language models. We're trying to leverage the capabilities of the large language model that's really good at generating text, and then also following instructions, which are the prompts that Ian was discussing. So the quality of the context that you're feeding into the prompt is extremely important in the quality of the answer you're going to get out of it. And then also there's some settings and temperature settings where you can say, I don't want the model to go too far away from the context or the content I've passed it. And then, of course, on the back end of that, once that content's been generated, you need to have a way to make sure or validate the accuracy of that answer. And how we currently do that now is we know the context that was passed in. We want to restrict the model from going outside the context and getting information that wasn't passed to it. So the most important part is that what you're passing into the model and your retrieval of the information.
Great. Hey, Eric, this is probably a question for you. It's another question from Victor. And basically he wants, I know you guys touched on it, or Ian touched on it. He wants to talk about analytics, how advanced, how the advanced insights provided are, how advanced the insights are, or how advanced the insights provided are, and are recommended actions included. Can you give more real life examples, which you guys are great with the real life examples that you've encountered? I don't know if you want to tackle that now or.
Yeah, so, from, I guess just trying to, in general terms, just using AI for analytics insights versus in context of information retrieval and answering. In context of information retrieval and answering, we obviously are logging those events, and there's an audit trail of someone said this, we generated and shared this response. And then there's also ratings where a user can say, yeah, this helped, this didn't help. In the context of an agent, on part of our roadmap is what we're doing is if we present let's say they're on a chat and we present a answer from the generative model that they should share, what they do with that answer, do they totally send something else? Do they edit it slightly? Or do they just click the button to say, yeah, this is great, send, right? So based on that, we are capturing those events so that we can determine how successful the generative AI model is working. I'm not sure, kind of in the context of overall using AI to gain insights. We do that kind of on the classification side. So from an activity perspective, as these contacts are coming in, classifying them. Also on the entity side, where we're trying to pull out and extract entities, and some of that is reportable in analytics.
All right, great. Hey, I'm going to try and weave in John's question from way back at the start, because I think it kind of relates to this other question that I have. And I'll start with the first question. How can we restrict GPT to look only at an internal knowledge base? And John's question is, how do we use AI without giving the protocol information the company would like to protect, but essential in its operation? I know you've looked at that and grappling with what exactly the question is there, but
yeah. Starting with the second part of that, it's important the vendor, the solution that you're interacting with is trustworthy and has a solid data privacy and user agreements in place, and all the contractual pieces are there. So, going online and Googling, ChatGPT product and going in and typing your information to a form is not the best idea. So when we integrate with when we integrate with OpenAI's models, we are using their APIs, and we have to ensure that the data privacy and protections are there. Just as if you had your email and your PII content within our system, we have to have the same privacy agreement. So we typically, they have an Azure offering where they are not storing the data. So you can request a special agreement with them where they don't actually store the data. And it's Microsoft, and we have to trust them and their lawyers and all the agreements that they sign and things that are in place. You'll get, if you're just using the freeware version, they've even OpenAI's changed those policies, but they do keep the data because they want to make sure that you're not using the service to violate any of their privacies, where you're generating toxic content or all the negative things that you can potentially use the technology for. They want to ensure. And then the other part is, I believe, was around how do you I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question, Bob?
Okay, so the first part of the question, how can we restrict GPT to look at only the internal knowledge base?
Yeah, so that's by having a knowledge base, of course, and having trusted sources of content. And then what our solution does is as Ian mentioned earlier, is we search that knowledge base, and we find 5 or 6 different articles that potentially have the information or the answer to that question. And then we feed that into the GPT model in a structured prompt. And then that model returns and extracts out of that content we've passed in the results. And since we're also passing the context, we know we have references because we know where these answers came from.
Great. Okay, so here's a great question from Dan, and it's probably the best constructed question that I've seen in quite some time. And he asks, KM is people, process, and technology. I really like how you showed how the technology can enhance a solid and well-constructed process. My question is, how can this technology improve and enhance user experience and generate employee buy-in? Are people ever turned off or dislike non-human content in their KM system? Age-old question.
Yeah, well, from an information retrieval perspective, if you're it depends on the specific use cases, but if you have to go and find information, you want it to be, one, trustworthy and accurate, and you want it to be as easy to find as possible, with the least amount of barriers, so you can use that information to actually do your job. You don't want to spend 5-10 minutes looking for a piece of information to do something. You want to be able to just find that information. So anything we can do to reduce and improve the quality of the information retrieval, the information that the end user is using, as part of their job, is going to go over well. As far as we don't believe in just generating content by AI and then allowing users to consume it. It's a good, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good way to kind of get past that initial writing block, to take existing content and rewrite it, to save authoring tasks. But at the end of the day, an author should really be approving that content and saying, this is fit for consumption by my user base, right? We feel there should be a process there where even the AI generated content is reviewed. Now, that's different from generating answers on the fly from context that's passed in. This would be net new articles that could then become context that gets passed into the model at query time.
Okay, we're up at the top of the hour right now, so I'm going to ask one last question. From actually, I lost it. I think it was Jacqueline, and basically her question is, how do I get executive buy-in? I'm going to ask that question a little differently. With all of the hype cycle, which is surrounding AI and customer service, CX, EX, how can people get executive buy-in in a practical approach? Hey, this is what it can really do. This is not something that will come down the line in 6 months, 12 months. This is what we can do now. How would you advise somebody to, get executive buy-in on a realistic?
Yeah, I think executive buy-in, I think, would be to show some moving the dial on the customer experience. So maybe look at some content on your current website, for example. Maybe experiment with some prompts that are more specifically tied to a particular customer. See if you can rewrite that, and then just go to the exec and say, look, here, which do you prefer? This one took the web team 3 weeks to produce. That was input to this, which took 5 seconds to do. So I think, you should only get executive buy-in if there is, if it's worth it. I think there's the hype, and then there's the risk at the moment. Immediately after the wow, isn't this amazing? Then there's the what if the AI takes over the world, or what if it starts giving toxic answers? So depending on whether your execs are, or whether you've got a part of the business where you could experiment, maybe with the partners rather than with the customers or something, or whether they're more risk averse. So, there are still organizations who are, haven't really got onto web self-service yet because they're still waiting for the buy-in. So
Right. Okay, great. Hey, listen, thanks for everyone for joining us today. Everybody that asked some really great questions, and especially to eGain for making this possible, and especially Ian Jones, Head of Strategic Solutions, and Eric Anderson, Senior Principal Product Manager. Thanks so much for sharing with us today. If anybody would like to review the event or send it to a colleague, don't worry, you will get an email from us once the event is posted in the next day or two. And the winner of the $50 gift card is Victor Rafat. Congratulations, Victor. Don't worry, we'll get in touch with you and connect you with your prize. But thanks so much for joining us. And that concludes our broadcast for today.